as a person, we have gone through so much in our own individual lives. And these low moments, when they hit, they can hit very hard. Remember those times that you've gone through those points where you didn't think you could make it. And when you're sitting there and you're having those self-doubts, like remember those times. You can do it. It's just sometimes that want to not do it is superseding. So think about what you can do, vice what you want to do, and flip that script.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Running Tales podcast, where we aim to tell the extraordinary stories of everyday runners. My name's Craig Lewis and this week's guest is ultramarathoner Natasha Swartley. Tasha wasn't particularly into sports and certainly not running when she was growing up, but that all changed when she joined the US Navy at just 18 years old. An initial healthy dislike of push-ups and squats slowly developed into a love of fitness and eventually running. Tasha's naval career morphed into seeing her responsible for the physical standards of 3,000 men on her watch. And in 2019, she completed her first 50-mile ultramarathon, despite neglecting proper nutrition and electrolytes along the way. Tasha has since left the Navy to become a wilderness EMT, but her love for ultra running has blossomed. We chatted about life as a high-ranking woman in the Navy, hauling bombs across ship's decks, and the power of the DFQ. That's don't fucking quit to you and me. We also spoke about what it's like to DNF a 100-mile race and how running can be a constant learning experience. But when we set up this podcast, Tasha told me she may not be a great runner, something we'd vehemently deny, but she has some great stories. So rather unfairly, I started our chat by asking her to tell me a great running story.
Well, hello. It's such a pleasure to meet you. Oh my gosh, what are some good run stories? You know, I gotta tell you, your first ultra is probably the one that creates the baseline for all great stories. And so I'll tell you my first experience in an ultra. So I was deployed for most of my training. I'm retired from the Navy, US Navy. So I was deployed for most of my training, so most of which was done on like a stationary treadmill. And so I went out to Oregon and I was going to run my first 50 miler, only ever having done a marathon prior to that, and knowing nothing about electrolytes, nutrition, how to eat, you know, like all these things, or even how to train, like going into this type of terrain. I was like, I got this. It's just a run. So I'm doing great the first half. And then after the 50K mark, my life went to shit. So first of all, I thought I was developing hypernatremia, which is overhydration or dehydration, either way, because my urine color was like dark. And I was like, I'm going to die. So I'm like instantly panicking. Make note, don't eat beets the night before a big race. My best friend was crewing me at the time, and neither of us know anything. Like, I'm just eating things that are at the aid stations, hanging out, like every, I guess, first timers experience are just like, wow, there's food. So I get to, it's mile 37, and I'm like hardcore bonking. I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And, and I don't ever really get angry. So she's looking at me and she's like, you need to eat. And she's like 5'2", I'm 5'8". And she's like looking up at me with this sandwich in her hand. And she's like, you need to fucking eat. And I was like, fuck you. And I got like biting into the sandwich and I chuck it back in her hands. And I was like, no, I'm done with this shit. And I just like mosey out of the aid station, just like super angry, like munching on chips. And I'm like, fuck her. She doesn't know what she's talking about. I finished with like a minute to spare. I definitely like felt everything. But yeah, I'll never forget that. And then when you flip to the other side, and that hasn't happened again since I've taken many lessons, but I flipped to the other side on occasion and volunteer at aid stations, or recently I work as a medic at aid stations. So now I'm on the other side of it, where people are coming in and they're frustrated, or like I'm force feeding them after they've told me they've puked like 6 times. I'm like, you need to eat. Like trying to shove food in their face, like. So yeah, that was my first intro to ultras was like, don't eat beets, electrolytes are super important, and eat, and your best friends truly love you. Like,
Even when they're trying to throw food down your throat. It's really funny
yes,
what you say about electrolytes because I mean I've just finished my first sort of official ultra and I did it, so it's got a happy ending. But I tried. It was a 50K, but I tried to do one about 2 3 months ago, and it was just out of the blue. And you'll remember I'm talking the UK here, so this is super hot. It might not be in places in America, but it was suddenly like 28 degrees and I was sweltering and I had no knowledge of electrolytes because I'm an idiot.
oh,
And I basically got about 22 miles in and I decided to just sit down and have a rest. And it was the stupidest thing ever because it took me 25 minutes to stand up again because I cramped up so badly. So yeah, electrolytes, 100%.
it was so miserable that first ultra, and it was 50 miles, and like it was just so miserable recovering. Like I didn't know like what real recovery, like now I do, like I recover way better. But oh my God, like I remember the drive home the next day, and I was not driving, I was a passenger, and I remember just I never sleep in a car, but I was so exhausted. I couldn't get my own shoes on. I couldn't walk. I couldn't eat. I was so nauseous. And here was like it was a tally of like dehydration, low electrolytes, you name it. And it took me like it felt like 2 days just to get out of bed. Like it was I'd crawl to the bathroom. Like I was just a wreck. Backtrack a minute. Congratulations on your ultra. That's huge.
Oh yeah, thank you. No, it was pretty cool. It
Yeah.
was one of these looped events, and I just set out super slow and just kept going. So yeah, it worked out really well. But yeah, there's nothing like the feeling of kind of getting to the end of it and thinking, oh my god, I did that. So it's pretty cool. And I was going to say to you actually because I read a blog that you did about finishing that 50 miler and what got you through, which I think was a little band or something that you wore, which had some particular letters on it that meant something very particular in themselves.
The DFQ.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was so it's a little patch. Actually, it's a patch that's given to folks who do ruck events, where they're hiking around with the backpacks. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but heavy ass backpacks and they're rucking, and it's a similar thing to like what soldiers do when they're out in the front lines and they're having to navigate, rough terrain, or dangerous situations. But it's a patch that it was given to me going into my first ultra, and DFQ, don't fucking quit. And there are like I still have that patch to this day, and there are times it's a harder, more aggressive side of me when I need to hit that low. I've really matured in my in my ultra training, where I'm not as aggressive about it anymore. I'm very more mindful and practice more like mindfulness when I'm out on the trails. But when I'm hitting that bonk that low, DFQ, like I'm like trying to really, really dig even deeper into my soul, and like don't fucking quit. Like what do I have, and sometimes you have to. Sometimes like it just you just it's not in the stars that moment. It's not in the stars. Like I don't even want to call it DNFs because I've got two, and that's fine. They're lessons, and I made choices to pull chalks, for all the right reasons, but every single one of them, there's lessons to take forward into the next one. So did I quit? Essentially, yeah, that's fine. um, you know, but yeah, DFQ. It's a good little slogan, for the aggressive side if you have an assertive need to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. And how far has that attitude got you to go now in terms of the ultras that you've done? Because I think you've done a bit more than 50 miles since then.
Yeah, so this past year and a half has really like I started training from scratch, and so built a new baseline and whatever. Longest distance I've commuted on foot was 71 miles. That was just a few weeks ago, or 2 months ago, something like that. I don't even remember. But it was in another 100-mile attempt, and it was brutal. East Coast of the United States. They call it the Beast Coast. It's a very unique terrain, bouldery, rocky. It's not the most runnable. In addition to that, it was raining 24 straight hours the whole day, and it was tough. I just didn't have anything left in the tank, but I was still positive about it. Like, hey, like whatever. 71 miles is a long time in the rain, in the mud, in this terrain. Like, if you've got listeners out there that have done anything in the East Coast, like the Northeast coast of the United States, it's unique. You know it when you see it and when you feel it, and you never forget it. But yeah, 71 miles.
I mean, people talk about, trying to do 100 and only doing 71, and they'll put, you read it somewhere and they put a word like failure. And I mean, it's just not failure, is it? Running 71 miles.
No,
It's just incredible. So well done, you.
thank you. Yeah, it's hard to say. Like, and it's, for some, like, DNF is a real thing, but really, it's not a failure. I mean, and what's beautiful is, like, the trail community is very supportive about it, because nearly everyone in some capacity has been humbled by nature. And as much as you want to achieve whatever goal it is that you have, and it doesn't have to be a 100-miler, it could be the 50K, it could be the 10K, because 10Ks are hard. Let's be honest, like, those short distances on a trail, they're intense. And and if you don't finish, like, it's okay. You still finished. You finished a distance that you didn't before, or you have already, and it just wasn't in the stars that day, but you still finished.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about the shorter races, particularly on trails, being a nightmare, because obviously I said I've done the ultra. The other bigger race that I did this year is something called the Dovedale Dash, which is over trails. It's just short of 5 miles. It's the most ridiculous race I've ever done, up and down hills. I had to go through a river at one point. There was so much mud, we were drowning in it. And I've never been so. If you look back through my Twitter, somewhere there's a picture of me looking the most horrendous I ever have in my life at the end. So you're exactly right. Sometimes these shorter distances are just as hard. But talking of amazing places to run around, obviously I've seen some of the pictures you've taken on your Twitter feed and where you've been running. It just looks, I mean, what a series of places to go running in. So I don't know, maybe first of all, for people who don't know, let them know where you run and what it's like.
Yeah, so literally just moved to Colorado Springs last week. So, I was living in Pennsylvania, just north of the Philadelphia area. So a lot of the training I was doing out in Pennsylvania was actually on the Appalachian Trail. Some beautiful, beautiful ridges up there, views. Again, East Coast. Its terrain is just unique. So it taught me a lot about how to navigate rocky terrain. Some of the races I did when I was out on the East Coast were up in New York, in the Finger Lakes region. So it's just northwest of the New York City area, and also Vermont, and New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So beautiful, beautiful terrain. You're not going to have steep peaks, but you're going to have volume of peaks. So it's deceiving. If you ever look at courses out there, there's a lot of elevation gain, but it's the volume of the hills vice the steepness almost. And then recently, this past summer, I've been working for destination trail races. So the Tahoe 200, the Bigfoot 200, and then most recently the Moab 240. So when I wasn't working fixing people's feet or helping them find trash bags to puke in, I took advantage of the time I had to go explore some of the terrain. And oh my gosh, like, it is so gorgeous out in this area. Like, I've lived in San Diego. I have lived in Washington State, but I have not ventured to these places that this race series took me to, and it was just absolutely stunning and runnable. They're all runnable, which was fantastic. And then the altitude kind of changes things up because it adds an extra element of challenge when you're, a couple thousand feet above sea elevation. So super, super gorgeous. Anywhere you can find a trail, go explore it because there's something to find there for sure.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Talking of the elevation, I've never really run at elevation, but I did a few years ago go hiking on the Inca Trail, and the first thing that I saw entering Cusco at the start of the trail was some poor lady who walked off the plane before us, just crumple down and collapse in a heap just because of the like instant altitude sickness straight down. So, but she was fine, thankfully. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it,
it's a real thing. The altitude sickness is a real thing. And when I was working at Moab, as a medic for the runners, like there was one of the aid stations I worked at, they were coming down off of a pretty steep peak. And we had a couple of folks that were facing some altitude illness. And it's a real thing. It can be very, very scary. So, just be gentle on yourself, recognize those signs and be gentle. But yeah, it's a very scary thing. I hope the lady's okay. I'm glad you're okay.
yeah, well, I was fine, fortunately, and everyone else was fine. And I mean, I didn't know her, but she was fine. She was up and sitting and talking 5 minutes later, so I'm sure she
Okay.
was absolutely fine, and nothing but perhaps a little bit of embarrassment and a story to tell people, and a story for me to
Yeah.
tell people. So it's all good.
No, welcome to trails, right? Like,
Yeah.
even in ultra running, like you get into some, and you don't have to do 100+ miles to experience some shit, right? But a lot of the experiences I've seen were the most recent races working at these 200s and seeing what some of these folks go through, and I'm like, oh my God, they're so brave. They're such courageous and strong people. Like, I'm so amazed by them, and yet it's absolutely hilarious because they'll come in and they're just like dragging, they're like holding a Reese's pieces, to their mouth, and they're like, I just don't want to eat it anymore. I'm tired of food.
It's incredible the
Hilarious.
things we do for apparently for fun.
Yes, yes, but it is. It's enlightening because when you see them, when they come through that finish or when they reach that aid station and they're just like, look, like I can't do it anymore, and you're trying to find any reason to make them sit down, if they've got time, like just to kind of like settle on the decision before they finalize it. Every single one of them, just so many kudos, and it's just so rewarding. Every bit of it is so rewarding.
People listening to you now who don't know your backstory might think, oh, Tasha's probably been involved in running and ultra running her whole life, but that's far from the truth, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, no, I think I was about as lazy as it gets going through my high school years. No, man, I didn't play sports growing up. I don't come from an athletic family. Right out of high school, I was 18, joined the U.S. Navy, spent 20 years in the service. And even then, in my early years of the service, I hated working out. I did do a lot of push-ups because, I'm a little sarcastic at times. So I was rewarded with push-ups quite frequently. And, and as my career progressed, I've had a lot of like just personal changes through the years. I got more into running. I think I actually started road running back in 2008. I was gaining a little bit of weight and my uniforms were getting a little snug. So I was like, well, I'll try this run thing. Like, and that was when I ran my first 5K. But trails, I got into trails a few years later, in 2015 when I moved out to San Diego. And that's really when my fitness started to progress. So even still, like I'm still in the Navy at this time, and I ended up taking over as a command fitness leader. So like overall in charge of 3,000 sailors fitness, making sure they're passing their tests and everything else. So I really had to set the bar a lot higher for myself, because if I'm going to expect people to do their job, then I need to be able to do it. So, and 2019 was when I ran my first ultra. Well, I retired from the Navy in 21, and I think it was in, yeah, early 22. Was it 22? When did I move to PA? Yeah, early 2022 is when I started right back from scratch and really started to progressively find my niche in trail running. And, I started, my first race was a 10 miler, and then I progressed upward, and then I progressed upward, and I'm 40 now. So I'm like, I feel my best. I'm more mature when it comes to the running. So I have a better understanding of like self-care, because recovery is important. Nursing injuries is important. But yeah, like this last almost 2 years have just been blissful in the ultra scene. So many lessons learned, but so much gratitude to come with it, because it's taken me so many places, and then I get to meet such a wonderful community of people. So yeah, I think I barely graduated high school by the skin of my teeth. And I think I barely graduated boot camp by the same, because I don't like push-ups.
And then you made other new recruits do them when you got older.
I was so not nice about it. Like, I had the knife hand of knife hands, and I was like, that's not a push-up, 90 degrees, and just, oh, they hated me. But man, it was respected, because I had high standards. If I have to do this, at my age and in my lifestyle, you just have to do the bare minimum. So, but it's a good thing. I mean, health is incredible. It's worth the effort. It's worth the sweat. So yeah, I do not come from any cool, like, my parents don't work out, my sisters don't work out, like, totally the black sheep.
You mentioned that you're 40 now, and that you've obviously managed to be in the Navy long enough to have retired from it, which means I'm guessing you must have left. You must have joined at a pretty young age, out of a background of no physical exercise. I mean, what made you, particularly as we're talking 20 odd years ago, there probably wasn't the same levels of equality, and things aren't perfect now, but of equality in the armed forces. As a young woman, that must have been quite the move to make.
It was huge. So I was 18 when I went in, and then I retired when I was 38. So I did 20 straight years of service. And I so I work as an EMT now. I'm a wilderness certified EMT. I did not do that when I was in the Navy. I blew shit up. I worked on weapons. So, which considerably, for a long period of time, it's a very male dominating type of job. A lot of heavy lifting. It's grueling, very tiresome, it can be very cumbersome. It's mechanic work. It's greasy. It's gross, but it's whatever, it needs to get done. But when I went in 2001, so I went to boot camp in July 2001, and no idea what I was getting into. I never saw weapons, and I don't know what's weapons, what's aviation weaponry. I don't know. Little did I know that I was going to be putting bombs on fighter jets for a good amount of my career. Like, I was going to be lifting them and assembling them and storing them and handling them and being in charge of them and moving them and loading them and arming them and all this stuff, anything related with weapons. So, but early on in the career, I worked for a very small handful of senior women who'd been in many years prior to me. But it was still a growing community. Like, not a lot of women were in this field. And, of course, like, the Navy has been progressing over the years. Our Navy is 248 years old, but there are still steps that women, not just in my job, but in the service overall, are still like catching up on. In the weapons field, we still have yet to make certain rankings. Even when I was deployed in 2018, I was the most senior female in my job field out of 6,000 people. So I had a lot of weight. I felt like a lot of weight on my shoulders to adhere to certain standards, because a lot of people have their eyes on me. Like, I'm the most senior woman working in weapons. And then, just recently, even after just around the time I retired, there was a woman who, she took the seat as the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier, the first time in the naval history. And then just recently, a couple months ago, I was up in Boston, Massachusetts, where the USS Constitution is. And she's still a ship in commission. She's the oldest naval vessel in commission. And just 2 years ago, the woman's name is BJ. She took the reins as the commanding officer, the first commanding officer woman of that ship in the U.S. Navy. So, and I got to meet her, and having been through what I've been through, and just seeing the progression of women in the service. Because now, like in my time, like women were allowed to go on submarines, and they opened the doors for women to get into more special operations programs, and now we have women as skippers on these ships, and like the big vessels. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then I got to meet BJ, and not gonna lie, like I cried, because it's just such an empowering moment to see, not only the fact that, like, I'm a very gentle soul, but when I was at work, I had a very thick skin and a very hard, like, soul to be able to, like, because I had to compartmentalize, my emotions, as a human, to keep the mission going. So it's really beautiful to see other women who are out there empowering their strength, but also leading from a gentle side, and just they're so successful. It's awesome. I love it so much. It's so awesome.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely fantastic to see women get into those top roles and to do things that ridiculously women were never allowed to do before. It must have been, I mean, you hinted at it, that it must have been quite hard to be almost a trailblazer at times in that position, because the pressure on you, completely unfairly, is you've not just got to be good at your job, you've got to be the best at it, because you're probably being judged more harshly than a man in the same position would be.
It felt like it. Whether I was or not, I'm not sure, but I certainly put a lot of weight on my shoulders to do beyond the best that I could, and I had to also be realistic. It's a fine balance of, like, knowing that reality does not expect perfection, and perfection is not reality. And then the other half of it is like, okay, I need to be perfect at everything I do, because I don't want to mess anything up. I don't want my sailors to see that, like, I don't want my sailors to see me as a mistake, and in some cases I was their mom, which I adored, having to flop hats all the time in different types of roles I had to play, but I love them dearly, as if they were children of mine. And so I wanted to be the very best type of role model for them, but also teach them, like, lead them, guide them, and me being hard on them was my level of, like, love, care, concern, guidance, strength, to because once you exit the service, like, those qualities, those traits go a very, very long way. When you're in, it's tough, but when you come out, and I've experienced it, it it makes you better. It really makes you better, because nobody's going to tell you, like, oh, you missed your doctor's appointment. Like, that's not going to happen, and so teaching those traits and those qualities, and then, yeah, like, that weight on my own self puts it was challenging at times, but I don't want to put words in people's mouths, because I don't know if I was being judged, and if I wasn't, that's great. But certainly at times it did feel like it. So I was always doing my best to be the best I could for myself and for those around me. But most of all, just do my job, like, at the best of my ability, safely and proudly. Like, I loved what I did. I was proud to serve, and, and I didn't want to mess up in fear, I mean, like, there's a lot of people who rely on us, for keeping them safe at home. So yeah, it's a lot of weight to carry.
And actually, you've hinted at what my next question was going to be there, which is the resilience that you gained, the dedication, and the way you have to, I don't know, follow those rules and those whatevers within the armed forces and so on, and all that kind of stuff. You said that helps when you get into life after the Navy, but how much does that help when you're out on the trails, when you're doing an ultra run and you're in those horrible situations? You can sort of look back and go, oh, well, I've looked after 500 men as they do on a ship. It's fine.
And it's funny, because there are moments when I recollect on it. So there are some days where I'm like, that last race I did, I was running through 24 hours of rain. And I'm like, I've done this before. I've done this before. I've pushed bombs, back and forth on a flight deck, which is 4 acres in total, like, space, and in waves. And I've put bombs on jets in pouring down rain, like in heavy leather boots. And I've done it in snow. I've done it in freezing temperatures. And I'm like, some of these thoughts do run through my mind, and I'm like, I have done all of this before. Does it mean that I want to do it? No. But does it mean that I can? Yes. And that's the difference when I'm in a race setting. Like, I'm not competitive. Like, I am, but I'm not. I know I'm a mid-pack runner. I know that's where I place, and that's fine by me. I know where I stand, but it still gets me through. Like, when some folks are hitting their lows, which is a real thing, you got to find that piece, that why, or where am I at? Why am I crying? What am I upset about? Why am I doubting myself? And these things that I've already experienced, the strength, or listening to my own mentors, like, tell me, like, oh my gosh, you're doing great. Or listening to my mentors, like, scold me, when I was in the Navy, like that hard care, I guess, if you will. And those things, like, do run through my mind. So what I'm saying is that, like, these traits that I took away from the Navy really do carry forward, that commitment. Like, I have zero excuse to go hit the gym or do 100 squats. I have zero excuse to go dedicate 70 minutes or whatever amount of time I'm going to spend on my feet today. Zero excuse, because it's going to lead to my own demise if I don't commit to it. I have, but I also have to recognize that, like, okay, if I'm, like, legit injured, I'm going to be very honest about how my body feels. But, like, I have zero excuse, to keep, like, oh, rain, like, oh, my shoes get wet. Oh, well, they've been wet before. Guess what? You'll dry off when you're done. But at the end of the day, like, as a person, we have gone through so much in our own individual lives. And these low moments, when they can hit very hard. Remember those times that you've gone through those points where you didn't think you could make it. And when you're sitting there and you're having those self-doubts, like, remember those times. You can do it. It's just sometimes that want to not do it is superseding. So think about what you can do versus what you want to do, and flip that script.
Oh, Tasha, that's some wonderful advice to give to people and to finish on today. So thank you so much for joining me on the Running Tales podcast.
No, thank you for having me, Craig. This is so fun. Like, dude, I had the honor and the pleasure to hang out with some Brits after the Moab 240, and it really put into perspective how amazing just the culture is. I don't even want to, like, put it country to country. It's just absolutely amazing. The trail community is such a beautiful family. The run community is such a beautiful family. Everybody stands up for each other. Get involved, and it starts with one step.
Thanks again to Tasha Swartley for joining me on this week's Running Tales podcast. I hope you enjoyed our chat as much as I did. I think there were some fantastic things to learn about running, the power of the mind when running, and how the process can often be just as important as the results. If you enjoyed this week's Running Tales podcast, please leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen to us. It does really help other people to find the podcast and to be able to listen to fantastic stories like Tasha's. If you enjoy the Running Tales podcast, please also check out our Substack channel, runningtales.substack.com, where this week we have a question and answer session with the one and only Christopher McDougall, the author of Born to Run. We'll have another running tale for you next week, and I hope to see you then.